Okay, so if you don't like your grade, you want to try again. The second half of next week, I'm going to let people do the exam again. I know all of you are freshmen. Some people may not understand that it takes some work to do well in a college course. So you'll get that second chance, and I highly recommend you actually, put a lot of time into the materials I provided. Read through them. The answers are right there. There's no guessing game. I gave you the answers. The only thing you have to do is read them and study them. Okay, so today we're going to talk about free markets and get into more modern, and then we're going to talk about something called corporate social responsibility just briefly, and also libertarian point of view just briefly, and then next week we'll go into deeper into those things, and those are the current debates. So when you learn those things, you're understanding what basically people are arguing about these days. So the first thing we have to understand, though, is something called the free market, because the free market is the central issue for modern times. The free market is, really utterly new thing in history. To just allow people to trade and work and things like that, that's just not. It didn't happen. Most of the time, government was interfering with economics. Culture was interfering with economics. There was never any purely efficient market economic system really in history until probably the 1800s. The 1800s, started changing that. So we're going to discuss why that happened. And you saw a couple of videos explaining at least some theories about why the West in particular, which is going to be United States and Western Europe, became dominant. So you'll notice that people all over the world today are wearing suits and ties just like us. We're not wearing Japanese kimonos. And most people, use the dollar as their currency in some sense or another. Obviously the West has predominant military power, economic power, wealth, and cultural influence. It's just a fact. So how did that happen? That's kind of an interesting story, and also then what's the consequences? Now we live with this free market. What does that mean? In other words, is that a good thing? Is it a bad thing? What opportunities does it give us? What problems does it offer? Okay, so that's sort of the trajectory here. So this week and next week we're going to basically learn what the fundamental points of view are now, in terms of people arguing about what corporations should do. Okay, so let's talk about what is the free market and why should we care? And I don't think has anyone taken a course in economics? Oh, you have, really? Here or in high school or? Oh, here. Okay, so you can know all this stuff. In any case, what is the poverty line in the U.S. these days? Does anyone know? How much are you making every year if you're, what's the?
No, like the dollar amount?
Yeah.
It's like 15 and change right now.
Okay, yeah, it could be. The last time I checked it was 12, but that could have been 10 years ago. So that's, $15,000 is. Does that seem like a lot of money? Does that seem like you'd be happy with that, or?
Like how often?
Year.
A year? No.
No. What do you think your life would be like if you had $15,000 a year for the rest of your life? That's all you could make. What's your life like?
Food stamps.
Food stamps, okay. Which is actually even more value you get. Which is like, so basically you're getting something for free on top of that. Now, throughout most of history, there were no food stamps. So if you got what you got, and if you didn't get something, you what? You starve. If you don't have the money for rent, what happens? You're on the street. When did all these government programs helping people to retire, helping people when they get sick, helping people when they're out of job, helping people when they're out of housing, when did those programs emerge?
1930s.
1930s. So throughout most of history, even throughout most of U.S. history, if you have a life crisis, life-threatening problem, that's your problem. No one cares. There could be, if you belong to a church or a community that has charitable activities, they could be helping you out. That $12,000 would be a king's salary in the past. If you want to talk about world poverty, it's $3 a day. How are you surviving on $3 a day? What's your life like?
Probably like turn to a criminal or something.
Okay, well, yeah, you have to do what you have to do. Where are you going to live? What can you afford?
Aren't there like homeless shelters?
Yeah, so you're going to find something for free, right?
Yeah.
You just don't have the money. What are you going to eat?
I'm not that we call it like a grocery store or steal.
Okay, we're going to steal. And if we can't steal, if we get caught, and we can't steal, well, what's going to happen?
Starve.
You're going to starve. Okay? And guess what? People did starve on a regular basis. Do you know why we're so fat these days? Because our bodies are designed to store as much stuff as possible because we expect to be starving. That's the way life is. Now, 94% of the world's population in 1800 are living on, let's say, $1,000 a year. And that goes back 5,000 years to the beginning of history. 94% of people are living day to day, barely surviving. How about education? How many people in 1800 are educated that know how to read and write? Very few. How many people are going to college?
Almost none.
Very, very, very few. Maybe 1% of 1%. So what happened? 1820. Now the world's population now. The people that are desperate, maybe starving, maybe not, are only, what, 10%. What happened? 5,000 years, most people were starving. Now that's vastly different. What do you think? What happened? What's the big change?
Free market.
Free market, good guess. Anything else? Besides the free market, what other guesses are there?
Global trade.
Global trade is part of free market. Okay. Usually students will say something like, well, education, technology, right? It could be culture. Some people argue that it's culture. But something certainly changed. I would argue that it's probably a perfect storm. There's actually a movie called The Perfect Storm. Anyone see that? So it's basically, there's like really several rare things happening at once. And I think that's probably it. I think the technology part is probably part of it. And there's a lot of moving parts there. But certainly I'm going to argue that the free market is going to be providing this. In other words, the wealth we have now is just unheard of. This is, and obviously we don't appreciate it. We sit here in class, nice and warm and well fed, and we're complaining because we're bored, right? Okay, so this is another chart telling you what happened in all of history. Does anyone know what per capita means? GDP per capita. What does GDP mean?
Gross domestic product.
Okay, what does that mean? What is gross domestic product? Why would you want to know that? What is it a measure for? How do people use that? Gross domestic. So gross, that means it looks bad?
So it's basically the culmination of all goods and services that a country
The
produces.
value of all goods and services that are produced in a country. So what does that tell you? It tells you the wealth of the country. What is this telling you about the wealth of the world?
It shot up.
That's it? It shot up?
It went from functionally zero to
Yeah.
off the chart.
Off the charts. Okay, before free markets, this is how society was basically organized. Society is organized through tradition and government, and there's a hierarchy. In this case, there's kings, vassals. This is European medieval, but basically the same structure for all of society before modern times is basically this. Okay? Now, the idea is, if you are born as a peasant, you're born as a peasant, what are your career opportunities?
There's no, well, just you work there for a
You're a peasant. Can you become a knight? Can you become a bishop or a queen or?
You have to be born.
Yeah. If you are born into a peasant family, guess what you're going to be? If you're lucky. Because if there's several sons, then you may not inherit the estate. You may not get the equipment from your father to do a trade. Okay? So it's basically people doing what they've always done. They're living in their little town. They barely move out of that town. There's not a lot of free trade going on. If you decided to send your cart of goods 20 miles down the road to see if the next town wants to buy, what concerns might you have?
It being stolen.
Stolen. And guess what? It was stolen. There was no guarantee that if you did any trade, that your stuff just wouldn't be stolen along the way. Because your king may protect you, but the other king's not going to protect your stuff. You have no idea what's going to happen down there. So why should you risk trading? You're not going to trade. So there's no trading. If whatever position you're in, that's your position in life. That's your role. There's no free labor market, there's no choosing a career, there's no free choice. It's just doing what you need to do to survive. And guess what? When you're starving, you're not concerned with lack of free choice. You're concerned with, making this thing work. Okay, so you have self-sufficient areas where people, just do their thing, and the idea is if everyone just did their role, society would function as best as it could. Okay, given this, you're a peasant, you're a pretty smart guy, and you're thinking, I think I know a way of developing a new plow so I can double production. And I'm going to do some research on my side, save some money, buy some materials, do this, and test it out, and I'm successful, or you're successful, and now you've doubled the production, right? Is that a good thing?
It's a good thing.
What's going to happen?
I'll get more money.
Will you? Whose land is it?
Some. No.
As a peasant, is that your land?
No.
As a peasant, whose rules do you live under?
You go to the person who owns the land.
So the person that owns land does whatever the hell he wants with your extra production. Does anyone here want to work harder or innovate if someone else is going to take their stuff? So how incentivized are you to work hard or innovate? Or take risks? Or to invest your money in something?
Not a lot.
Zero. As a matter of fact, if you do something weird like innovate, they might think, why are you breaking tradition? They might not like you. See what the problem is? There's absolutely no incentive to work hard, to innovate. It's almost impossible to trade. And there's basically zero freedom of choice.
You gotta go to
This is only 200 years ago, folks. So what happened? Okay. This is the start of what happened. Gives you a hint. There's been trade throughout history, and a lot of societies got rich through trade, but there was always a political element. There was always political control and manipulation, limitations on it. There was problems with constant conflict. One of the good things about the Roman Empire, of course, they're very nasty to the people they conquered, but once they conquered them, everyone was actually living in peace, which was a rare thing. Throughout most of human history, going back before history, tribal warfare was horrific. We are not nice people. If you look at Aboriginal warfare, they slaughtered far more people. We think World War I and World War II is bad. They're constantly fighting, slaughtering each other. So the idea of having enough peace so you could trade, enough security so you could trade, is just, it didn't exist before. Okay. Is that me? Where'd that come from? Okay, I must have done something weird. I must have been experimenting with something. That is weird. Okay. So, what is a free market then? What is this miracle thing that somehow emerged? What are some basic elements of a free market? Okay, trade, definitely trade. How much trading? More is better? More is better. Go. Entrepreneurship. What does that mean? Let's unpack that.
The ability to innovate.
Okay, you're innovating, and you're also, you need to gather resources and capital. What is capital? Does anyone know?
How much money you have?
Well, it could be money. It could be other stuff. Like if you had, let's say, an ice cream making machine, you could that could be part of your capital in opening an ice cream business, right? So it's worth something. It's resources that you could use to start and carry out a business. Make sense? That could be money. It could be just stuff that you need to do that business. Okay. And also think about, what's not a free market, and then what kind of, so we've already talked about trade. What else?
Supply and demand.
Okay, so the supply and demand, what does that do for you?
Lets the market just control prices and.
Okay, so one issue that it solves is, how do you know, let's put it this way. There's a set of, if you take an economics course, economics is the study of basically the production and distribution of limited resources. So what to produce, how to produce it, how to distribute it, who gets what? All those things have to be decided by an economic system. In the old days, that was done by tradition, the king, managing, let's say, economics. You've heard of, if you've studied in high school, you remember mercantilism, where the government was always trying to put up tariffs like Trump is now, and things like that. Okay, so one of the things that, how do you solve that problem? In this case, we have in the U.S. 360 million people. Every day, they need something different, and they need to get that thing, or else they're not going to be able to feed their kids, they're not going to be able to progress in their careers, they're not going to be able to, do what they want. Okay? So how does this system of 360 million people somehow meet the various needs of all these people? And they're changing every day. what system would be great at deciding what gets produced, how it's distributed, who gets it, what's the thing, and you've already mentioned it, what's the information system that a free market has to do those things, to make all those decisions. What should we invest in? What should we produce? How should it be distributed? Who gets what? What's valuable and what's not?
I feel like you're
Very
looking
simple
for
answer.
democracy.
Very simple answer.
Like
No, well,
kind of-
democracy
well,
would
kind
be.
of more like in the sense that there's not one really massive being of power. In this, like, we as individuals, as part of the society, get to have some sort of influence on those things that you described.
Yes,
whether or
yes.
not-
That's true. I mean, but it is democracy is one way of doing that, but that's not. You know, what's the key? And he's already mentioned it. What's the one thing that what would make you invest in something? You have a bunch of money. What are you going to look for to find out where to invest to get the greatest return?
Something really interesting.
Okay, what makes things interesting?
Are you referring to the supply and demand?
Yeah. So basically, if, let's say, peaches went from $1 a dozen to $40 a dozen, you as an investor are thinking what?
I'm going to invest in beaches.
Yeah. So what tells you, what's the information process that tells you to invest in peaches? Or peaches, it's the price of peach. That tells you what to invest in. What tells you whether you can buy something, whether it's worth it to you. If you're going out tomorrow and looking to buy something, how are you going to make that decision?
My money, like how much money I
How much money you have, and then the relative value of all these things. So that communicates to the system, this is what people find valuable.
Talking about investing, the example you brought with peaches, how do you, if the price already went up, then you can't buy it for $1 anymore. So isn't the question like, how do you know it's going to go up in the future?
It's not a matter, I mean, that would be that would be a question of buying their stock, but we're not talking, we're talking about opening up a new peach farm. So now your peaches, the cost of production presumably will be the same, but then your profits will be astronomical. You're talking about the problem of investing. In other words, the price of a stock reflects everyone's guess about the value, and so if you buy at that rate, the only way for you to make money is really for them to be wrong and to be undervaluing that stock, which is very rare. Even stockbrokers can't figure out how to do that. Anyone that could figure that out would be a billionaire, right?
Yeah.
If you could figure out the stock market, then you just do it, and then retire. Okay, so there's a bunch of things that I think are really important for people to understand. Why is it? What is the? We've already sort of suggested that the free market is extremely valuable. It produces tremendous wealth. It gives us, lots of freedom of choice and so on and so forth. So it's really important to understand what preserves and provides the environment to make a free market thrive, and what are threats to that? What might destroy that? And that's an essential thing that people are arguing about today. But most people today agree that the free markets have proved themselves to be fantastic ways to coordinate economic activity. Even people who in the past have opposed free markets, like communists, very few people, even from a socialist or communist, or even a far-right perspective, would say we don't want a free market. Everyone kind of understands that this worked out great. There's arguments about tweaking that, but there's no argument about whether a free market's valuable or not. Okay, so has anyone ever heard of Wealth of Nations? So a guy published a book in 1776 called Wealth of Nations. His name is Adam Smith. Pretty bland name, but what else happened in 1776?
American Revolution.
Declaration of Independence. So lots of changes going on. One of the changes is there's changes in economics, so he is observing these changes, these slow changes, and the slow development of the free market. And he writes this book saying, okay, if this goes to its full extent, what is that going to mean? What might be, the components of a free market? How might it work? How might it be beneficial? What problems might there be? And he wrote about all those things. And so he's writing actually before there is a full-fledged free market. He's writing it as it emerges. And he explains why a free market would be tremendously efficient and would produce a fantastic amount of wealth. So he comes up with, he figures it out. So any educated person should know who Adam Smith is, by the way, and should know Wealth of Nations. It should be embarrassing if you don't know that, especially if you're a business student. In any case, what are the essential components for a free market? One is comparative advantage. So, who has the advantage in making peaches? Georgia or New Jersey?
Georgia.
Why?
It's hot weather.
It's hot, so the peaches like heat? Yeah, they do. So the environment in Georgia is conducive, so it's easier to grow peaches. It's probably quicker, they're probably better peaches, because the environment is perfect. Okay? So they have a ton of peaches. How about New Jersey? What do we have?
Corn.
We have corn.
Jersey corn, yeah.
Really?
Yeah.
All right. Jersey corn, okay. Corn, maybe one thing. Anything else Jersey does?
You've never been driving through South Jersey and found a corn farm? Like just like fields of corn? There's some up here too.
I'm just thinking of the Midwest. It's got a lot more corn than we do.
They do have more corn than us.
Yeah.
One of our-
Well, I am not in South Jersey too often, so
That's fair.
it's very rare I see
Neither
it.
am I.
Yeah. Okay, so what else does New Jersey do? Okay, tomatoes. All right, now we have tons of tomatoes. They're very cheap. They're very plump and tasty and nutritious. We have no peaches. So we take some extra tomatoes and give them to the Georgians, and they give us some peaches. What happens to the wealth of New Jersey and Georgia? Our life is now richer, right? Now we have tomatoes as well as peaches. Okay? Now suppose we wanted to put, let's say, gasoline in our car. Where are we going to get that?
Not ahead of us in the Middle East.
Hmm?
Middle East.
Yeah, I mean, does New Jersey have a lot of oil rigs? So basically, we can't drive a car. We have no plastic. Think about it. If you had no oil, what does that mean?
We can't change the oil in the car either.
Can't really use any
use
modern
all oil.
machinery at all, actually.
Most modern machine plastics comes from oil. A lot of clothes that you now buy that are pretty cheap comes from oil. Your laptop comes from oil. The pen you're holding comes from oil. So basically, New Jersey is living in the Stone Age because we have no oil. But if we make a deal with Saudi Arabia, now we have oil. And we can produce all those stuff. And in return, Saudi Arabia gets tomatoes, as well as an aircraft carrier protected. You see how that produces wealth? And without trade, we're done. all that wealth disappears overnight. So are we happy or sad if we're hearing about a war coming up? Why? Yeah, the trade is done. Has anyone ever heard of Yemen? What's going on in Yemen? War, okay. Do we care about that? Outside your tax dollars going to, you know,
Do we care about it?
to bomb the crap out of people. Okay, do we care about Yemen?
We don't have an emotional attachment to it, but
Yeah.
we care about people.
Let's forget about emotional attachments. Let's just say, do we have any
That's not oil.
practical concerns? Where is Yemen?
Right in the Middle East.
In the Middle East, and what is it near?
In Saudi Arabia.
Saudi Arabia, but it's also near the Suez Canal. And where does most of the world's shipping go through?
Suez Canal.
And guess what? Yemen, sitting in Yemen with a little rocket, you could shoot any ship that goes by. Now do you understand why, I'm not saying it's a good thing, but that Trump just bombed the crap out of them because they were shooting at ships? That's a big deal. Even, there was at one point a ship got stuck in the Panama Canal, and basically people in New Jersey lost their job. Because it took a week or two to dislodge that ship, and because world trading was disrupted so much, certain factories, you know, I got this from a student sitting in class saying his father's factory had to shut down because they weren't getting the supplies they needed. That's what happens. Okay, economies of scale. Does any idea? How does that produce wealth? What is an economy of scale? So if I were to make a drone, what would I need? What kind of investment would I need? What kind of resources or capital would I need? And what would I have to charge for that drone? I'm going to make one drone, just one, and then I want to sell it. How much do I have to charge for that drone?
You have to charge above the amount that you to produce.
Right.
The cover.
Okay, so what is the amount that it costs me to produce that one drone?
Probably like 20.
Well, think about it. If you wanted to produce a drone, you need an engineer to design one. You need a factory to produce it. You need a salesperson to sell it. You need accountants to pay the government taxes. And you need HR people to make sure you're not violating any laws. Then you need someone to supply or clean the bathrooms in your office and so on and so forth. And then you need, you know, to pay rent for facilities. And then you need to pay everyone in the meantime. So let's say it's about $15 million that it costs to make that one drone. How much do you have to charge? 15 plus profit, right? How many people can afford that? So it's nice that that's on a market, but it really doesn't help most people. It doesn't increase wealth all that much, right? Suppose you made 2 drones. What would you have to charge? Instead of 15 million, you're going to charge what?
7.5 plus profit.
7.5 million plus profit. Suppose you made 10,000 drones. What would you have to charge? Well, you can do the math, but a lot less. A reasonable amount, maybe you could buy the drone, no?
Yeah.
Okay, so that's economies of scale. Now, suppose there was a company that developed the perfect system of protecting your computer from viruses. Fantastic. And it was selling for $1 million. No one's going to be able to use it, right? But suppose millions of people had access to that, maybe they could charge a lot less. And then instead of buying the second or third best security system for your computer, you have access to the world's best. Not the second or third best, but it's now a reasonable price and qualitatively better product that you have in your hands because of the free market. And every day someone is coming out with something new and something better that you're going to want that's going to improve your life. Every single day. The other thing is, in the past, if the peasant innovated, what's going to happen to the extra crops? And let's say he was able to sell some of that, the extra money he had. What would happen?
The people ranked above him would probably have stolen his invention, taken credit for it, probably tried to go show it to the king so they could profit off of
Right.
the peasant.
And they might actually kill him.
Yeah.
Why? Because he's
Right.
threatening the current system. So I don't know if it's true or not, but there's this one story where somebody goes before Caesar and says, I found a way of sort of like a spinner to make cloth a lot easier. And so you would think that Caesar would say, great, let's implement that. Instead, he was like, okay, kill this guy, because basically he was taxing all this, the entire process. He's making his money off that process. He wants no change. Okay? So one of the things that happens is you have legal protections for your investments. If I invest in something and develop a good, I have a great method for doing tech support. And this actually happened. I went to a tech support place, and on the wall there was an article about how one of their employees had learned their system, which took them years to develop, which made them profitable. So they were able to do tech support and then make a serious amount of money. And then he opened up shop right next door, basically. Okay, so what does that do for his investment? Destroys his investment. Okay. So in the past, if you were a peasant and you decided to, I don't like this place, I'm going to go to the next town and I'm going to become a barber, they might actually kill you. They might put you in prison because there could be laws that say that's not allowed. There were times in which the peasants got more rights and less rights, especially after the Black Death, in which they lost a lot of people. They needed labor. They started being nicer to peasants. But most of the time, there was lots of rules and regulations. You don't have any choice. You don't have any, that's it. You're going to do that thing, and if you don't like it, too bad. So today, do you have to work in New Jersey? Are you thinking about maybe moving or working anyplace else? Do you like that idea that you can move and work anywhere you want? Okay, so you have, is there any law preventing you from doing that? Is there any cultural restrictions where they're going to hate you over there or something like that, just because you've got a job in their area? Probably not. They're going to probably say, okay, whatever, somebody moved in. It's not a big deal. So you have legal, if you developed, let's say, I don't think you could patent this, but if you developed a great system to do tech support that was very profitable, you would want to patent it. Or if you developed an idea for a piece of technology that, halved the price of something, and then you put that on the market and made a lot of money, what's the next thing that's probably going to happen? You invent something new, you put it on the market, everyone sees you're making a tremendous amount of money, so what are they going to do? Buy it. They're going to, well, I mean, if you wanted to be making money, I'm not talking about you buying their product, I'm talking about if you wanted to make money, what would you do?
Somebody's going to try to find a way to copy you.
Somebody's going to copy it. So what does that do for basically incentivizing people to invest and invent new things if it's just going to be copied and ripped off and someone else is going to make all the money? Does that provide incentive?
Kind of, but I think that it does for certain people.
Your answers are always complicated. Well, it could be nuanced, but I mean the fact is, if you had no protection for your intellectual rights, then you would be much less motivated, and so you probably wouldn't take risks, right? because you knew you'd be ripped off pretty quickly. Okay. What these protections do is gives you incentives to invest. If I invest in Pennsylvania, do I think the government's going to seize that because it's making too much money, or they just don't like the color of the building? Is that going to happen? You know, so you can actually take your money and it's going to be protected by law. What happens if the local community decides they don't like the color of your building and they decide to burn it down? Well, the law is going to protect you. They're not just going to let it happen. If your truckers are traveling across Utah, you know, do you expect them to be hijacked?
Not likely.
Not likely. Well, you know, if you did expect them to be hijacked, would you send them there? No. And guess what? You wouldn't be training anymore because the security isn't there. If the roads were too bad to carry your stuff because there's too many potholes, Route 80, what does that do for trade? So you need an infrastructure. You need police, right? You need roads. You need a legal system. If they steal your stuff, you need to be able to go to a cop to arrest them and fine them and stuff like that, right? So all of these comes together at once, and all of them are needed for a free market. Now, I've already gone through this. You know, what is the information system that coordinates the activities of 360 million people in the country and, what is it, 8 billion in the world? Because it's a world economy now. What is the information system that allows people to figure out what should I invest in? Who should get what? Supply and demand, and the other term for that is prices, right? So that's supply and demand. What tells you what are the most promising and valuable companies? The stock market is in part doing that. Would you want to get into, you know, if you could get into the business of video chip making for video games and computers, would you want to get into that business? Has anyone ever heard of NVIDIA? If you can get into that business...
Yeah, that NVIDIA, I would. I thought you were talking about Intel.
Well...
Because they make the chip.
Well, NVIDIA makes the video chips, but... Why would you want to get into NVIDIA? Because basically they're raking it in. They could charge whatever they want because there's so much demand for those chips. Okay? So that's what guides, the pricing guides decisions. Who gets what gets produced, how it gets distributed. Right? Makes sense? Okay, so this is actually one of the famous terms that Adam Smith used was called the invisible hand. And it's kind of an interesting concept. So, let's suppose I had a new economic system called, Billism or something like that. And I say, this is going to be a great economic system. I want to start tomorrow. What that means is that you have to have faith that this economic system is going to keep you employed, keep you fed, right? And it's going to still produce the goods and services you need to survive. Are you willing to risk hopping to a new economic system
Why don't we just all make money and then put it into one big pile and then split it equally?
That's called communism. What's the problem with that?
Many problems.
According to Marx, it's, from each by their ability, to each by their need. Sounds great. Sounds almost Christian. What's the problem with that? How does that undermine the free market?
No competition.
Yeah, competition would be important.
It doesn't incentivize innovation.
Right. There's no incentive. In other words, you're assuming that people are just going to be nice. I am going to work extremely hard and give everyone my talents because I'm just a nice guy. Does that sound like a good model for how people really are and how the world really works? No. And then if you're going to get everything you need, if you're just going to get everything you need, why do anything? You're just going to sit back and just, okay. So it's a nice concept, but it actually destroys the incentive structure. But the idea here is this is a weird idea. You got to understand how weird it is. If you had a system for 1,000 years that was feeding you, you know what was going to happen. It was fairly reliable. Occasionally you starved, but most of the time you didn't starve. And someone's saying, okay, there's this new system, and what you have to have is faith that everyone throughout your country or your world, or let's just say England to start with, that everyone pursuing their self-interests in England that are freely exchanging goods and services, that system will keep you fed tomorrow. Now, we know that works, but can you imagine the sell it would have to take to say, okay, let's trust people being selfish all over England and getting into this free exchange, and that's actually going to keep me fed tomorrow. It's kind of a leap of faith. It turns out it doesn't work. But I would imagine it's just kind of a weird thing. What you're saying is that selfishness. There's actually a movie called. There was a movie called Wall Street. I think it was the movie called Wall Street. There was you ever hear the greed is good thing? There's a famous speech in this movie. This investor, makes this big speech about how greed is good and how greed helps us to innovate and to progress and produce and inspires us and motivates us. So we're unleashing our selfishness. We're unleashing our greed. We're unleashing our pure self-interest. We don't care about anybody else. We just want the money. That presents a few quandaries. One is it kind of encourages you to be selfish and not concerned with your community and stuff like that. But it's also kind of like you're just trusting that the interactions amongst all these strangers will somehow work out, which to me is kind of a scary thing. But the idea is this invisible hand of this competition between all these people who never met each other will somehow produce the goods and services that allow us to survive. Okay. What political things would you need for a free market to exist? Or, if you can think of a cultural thing, what cultural things would provide for a free market, and what cultural things would interfere with a free market?
Political things, I would say, like we said earlier, laws to protect.
You need laws to protect property, laws that are not going to interfere with freedom of labor to move about and get a job wherever they want, right? And all of these things in history were not given. Most of the time you couldn't do whatever you wanted. You need protection of property and intellectual protection, so the patent office, okay? You need actually you need a bunch of things from the government, but Now, I don't know if you remember the homework, but it was mentioned in the Why Nations Fail video that there's laws in place that are very fair in Mexico that protects consumers from cronyism. In other words, monopolies, and for people controlling a certain market that undermines competition, right? So most of the time, free market people don't like monopolies. Why not?
Because that doesn't give you like compensation to be able to join the game.
All the incentives come from competition, you just undermine competition. Now suppose one company had friends in the government and the government passed laws making it impossible for his competitors to operate. What does that do to competition?
Kills them all.
Kills, yeah. So the government cannot be on one side or another. It's got to be fair and it's got to be neutral. It's got to stay out. Okay? And, that's actually a new thing in history. How about a social or cultural thing? Free markets are all about exchanging what? Goods and services, which is material value, right? So does a monk that meditates all day long, is that a person that's going to help a free market to expand wealth?
You need, well, no, but you need skilled laborers that have something to contribute to society.
Yeah, you need people who are ambitious and who want to achieve these things and who value material things and are willing to, pursue those things. I mean, you can live life without a lot of money and, have spiritual and social values that you enjoy. You don't have to actually, grind away and make as much money as you can and spend as much money as you can throughout your entire life. But a society where people don't care about material things, probably a free market's not going to function as well. Because you're going to have less, involvement, with that. So your people have to be somewhat materialistic. Alrighty then. Okay, so how did this all happen? One thing, you had a, like I said before, you had a perfect storm. One theory is that we had a slow evolution in the West towards individualism. So remember how society was coordinated before. It was basically kinship networks. Who did you work with? Who did you trust? It's your brother, your cousin, someone you know, someone in your town maybe, but it's probably family. And if it's not direct family, it's indirect. Your sisters, brother-in-laws, uncles, some tie like that. That's how you trust people. That's how you coordinate with them. That's how you deal with them. And outside of that family, what perspective do you take on anyone outside of your kinship network or your immediate little culture there?
They're untrustworthy.
No. A lot of times, basically, and ethically, do you have to deal with strangers the same way you deal with friends and family? So, a lot of times, if that's a stranger, you can kill them, you can rob them. That's a stranger. There's no moral compunction to be nice to them. So the idea of trusting strangers and working with strangers does not exist. Does anyone remember how it changed?
They started making incest illegal.
Incest is illegal. Cousin marriages are illegal. They're starting to break apart this kinship network. And then if your family is not able to supply all your needs, what do you have to do? You're going to have to go out into the community, deal with strangers, and organize with them. So you're going to have to organize politics with them, economics with them, culture with them. So what you're going to do is get together with people and maybe form a political party and maybe start voting on things. Whereas before, you would just defer to, the head of the family. For economics, you're not just doing what tradition and your family says you're going to do. You're going to go out and figure it out and interact with people and find a way to support yourself economically. It's a vastly different thing. And this is only in the past few hundred years. Why nations fail? I think we pretty much went over this already, so we don't have to do this. By the way, these researchers won the Nobel Prize for this research. Okay. I think we said all this. The one thing, the term that I think is worth learning is cronyism. Has anyone ever heard of that term? One thing is what is a threat to a free market? One threat is cronyism. Have you ever heard that term?
The term cronies.
Cronies, yeah. So, okay, what does cronies mean?
Goons.
Okay, goons. Lapdogs, people that are going to do something for you, right? So let's go back to the example before. Let's say you're in competition, you're making electric cars, and Elon Musk is making electric cars, and you happen to be richer than Elon Musk, so you're able to buy more senators than he is. You're able to contribute a lot more money to their campaigns. You can fund a think tank. You can even pay people to protest in the streets. You could fund academics to advocate your ideas. You could probably have a lot of cultural influence and influence over government. And what are you going to do? You're going to do everything you can to undermine that competition and undermine Elon Musk so you can beat the crap out of him in the market, right? So you're going to use the government and you're going to use your cultural power to undermine the market. Sound like a good thing or a bad thing?
Bad?
So, if markets aren't functioning, what happens to the price and quality of electric cars at this point?
They decrease.
They decrease. Why? There's one company that has an advantage because they bought a lot of senators, are able to change the law, change the policy. They're able to influence regulators not to enforce certain laws when it comes to them and to enforce them only when it comes to Elon Musk. What happens to the market?
Our ability as consumers decreases to impact.
Well, let's switch the market. Let's say it's bread. One company has vast amount of influence over the government, and so basically they're able to change all the laws so that only their bread is worth buying. The rest of the bread is too expensive, and it doesn't have the ingredients that you have because you have all this influence and make it very hard for them to make bread. So what impact does that have on you guys? Why would you care? This one government is the only, or this one company is the only company producing and providing bread. What happens to you?
Because then it becomes a monopoly and they could decide what they want to do.
Right. If they decide bread is now $10, what's your choice? You have to buy it. And if you say that bread is getting lousier and lousier every year, or there's ingredients that are known to be harmful, what's your choice here? Can you get those
Buy
things?
the better bread. If you can.
That's the only bread available. You're going to buy and eat that bread. That's it.
Okay.
Basically, there's no innovation, there's no quality, The price is whatever the hell they want it to be because you need to eat your bread. And if you don't, you're dead. Okay? Has anyone ever heard of fascism? That's cronyism. Basically, it's the combination of a dictatorial government with private enterprise and then colluding and cooperating to their advantage, politically and economically over everyone else. That's fascism. That's exactly what it is. So basically, when you see a free market economy lean towards cronyism, that's what's happening. That's how dangerous it is. Well, I think I talked about this. Markets depend on all of these things being taken care of. You've got to be safe. You need police. You need the law. You don't like potholes. So that's a necessary. You have to have a functional government that's doing these things well. If you don't have a functional government providing that, the free market can't, optimally operate. I think we did this already. Okay, so what are some alternatives to free markets? I mentioned one alternative, which is fascism. Has anyone ever heard of communism? That's actually a modern alternative to free markets. So how does the economy operate?
The government determines prices and what to produce.
The government runs everything. Does anyone know how that worked out?
Lots of
Not
payments.
good. Bad things.
Well, I mean, there's economically, there were some successes because Russia went from a backward economy to an industrialized economy. The downside is they killed 20 or 30 million of their people in the process. Chinese, same thing.
And they fought a few wars.
Yeah, well, they were attacked though. You got to admit, so. So how does that work? The government, the government has to sit there. If communism controlled the United States, the government would have to figure out what 360 million people need today, how to produce it, how to get it to everyone. How would they do that? The government runs the entire economy. So what is the government, how is the government going to do that? Without a free market. We're just going to starve? Go.
Okay, so is communism based on what Marx was saying?
Yeah, indirectly, yeah.
But Marx was saying that he believed in a classless, moneyless society. So if the government, like before you were saying, there's a big giant pile of money, I work 5 hours, you work 20 hours, let's each take an equal chunk. But that wouldn't really be communism because Marx didn't even, like real communism doesn't even believe in money itself.
Well, if you read the first place, a lot of these ideas are not well fleshed out. In other words, Marx didn't think through everything. There's a lot of things that he just didn't even talk about. Like, how do you get from capitalism to this utopia? He never even talked about it.
Yeah.
And so basically Lenin was saying, well, he didn't tell us what to do, so we're going to come up with a party that, dictatorially controls the government, and we're going to impose communism. So that's one idea.
But if communism is ultimately aiming for a classless, no government society, then how is this communism where it's totalitarian,
No,
government owning all
it's not no government society. It's a society in which, the principle would be everyone, from their abilities, and everyone, gets for their needs.
Yeah, that's a community. That's not a government.
Okay. Well, that's the idea. In other words, if you don't have a free market, how do people get fed? How do people work? How do you make investment decisions?
Well, I
How,
think the ideal part of it was that it's the sense of community, but it wouldn't be a government, that's what.
well, you know, see, the thing is, I don't think the socialists really thought it through. In other words, the idea is once you get rid of capitalism, then everything's going to be nirvana. They never actually said, okay, specifically this is what you do to replace capitalism. They didn't say anything. So what happened with Lenin decided, well, in order to make this work, we're going to have a one-party government which dictatorially imposes that on everyone because the capitalists within our society and the capitalists outside of our society are going to fight us. And we have to struggle and fight to survive because we're being constantly attacked. So that's why they formed a sort of a dictatorial one-party state to impose this on everyone, to force this classless society. To get rid of all the classes, to get rid of all the distinctions. For the first time in history, also women got equal rights. And so the communist ideology, in a lot of senses, had some very new and interesting things. In other words, theoretically, you're not supposed to be concerned with race or gender and so on and so forth. You're just supposed to be concerned with being a worker. And you're called comrade. Everyone is supposed to be the same. It's radical equality. That's the ideal. Everyone being equal will spontaneously be nice to each other. That's apparently their idea.
So, what about like Denmark and Norway and Sweden, like they're implementing, so I've heard, like democratic socialist policy, and it's worked out for them.
Yeah, but it's not communism. In other words, the government is not telling is not saying this is where we're going to invest, this is what the prices are going to be. You need to work in that factory. All of that's coordinated by the government. In Denmark and in Sweden, they have a higher taxes, they have more free social services, but they basically have the same economy as we do.
I mean, yeah, but their population also doesn't really complain about paying taxes because they know the worth of it because their taxes are well
They
spent.
like it, yeah, they like it. But that's not communism. Communism is complete government, dictatorial control over every last aspect of the economy and culture. One thing, the one central government, the one party controls all decisions in society
That's my vacation.
to force equality. That's communism. What we have now is more or less, balances between a free market and government services. So in the U.S., you elect someone like Trump, you have more free market and less services, and then the Democrats come in and do the opposite. And actually, what happened in Sweden, they started in the 70s with a lot of socialistic policies where the government was taking over a lot of things, and the economy went down the drain. They actually got rid of that. So they got rid of a lot of their government, controls over the market because they saw it was undermining their wealth. And now they've kind of reverted back to, they still have free health care, they still have free education, they have a lot of stuff that we don't have, but it's still not a communist dictatorial power, okay? But that's the major debate today. What level of government services versus free market should we have? That's essentially the bottom line debate we're having right now.
So you're saying like in Russia at this time, like communism worked to get them out of a like poor state to like an industrialized state? I guess that was an example of it working.
They were essentially a peasant society, agricultural. They had very little industry, and within 30 years they were able to fight World War II.
Yeah, so I guess the next step would be the utopia that was promised.
Yeah.
Which there was no actual
that's
plan
never
there.
spelled out. Like no one actually says this is how you do that.
Mhm.
And so people, it's just,
So what incentivized them to industrialize?
They believed they had it's like having a great faith in something. I don't know if you know anybody who has a great faith in something and they just passionately believe and they know it's true and it's just like this is going to save the world. That kind of idea.
So like minorly brainwashed or into like
Not really. I mean, I remember I'm reading this.
Just
this
buying into
buying
Buying into
into
it.
a political
Well,
belief.
the other part of it was real. I mean, in other words, you had a system where the aristocrats controlled all the money and everything, and everyone else was utterly poor, had no services, no education, no health care, no reliable food for most of the population. Now, what happens with communism? Yes, they end up killing a lot of people, but most people don't even know that because it's happening and there's no free press, there's no news. But what you do see is suddenly your town has a school in it. Suddenly your kids have opportunities. Maybe they can become an engineer and go to Moscow. You like this.
Okay.
Now there's machinery, now there's cars, now we have, and they actually sent a rocket to space, the first rocket to space. We're proud of this. We don't, and the idea is we're all equal here. We don't have this extremely rich Elon Musk and this person who can't buy books for his kid.
Yeah, and they did a lot of propaganda against capitalism too.
Oh, yeah.
To help.
Yeah, we did propaganda, they did propaganda, it was, and so, they will explain the murdering by saying, well, we were threatened by international capitalism and by the capitalists trying to undermine us here, and, eggs had to be broken.
Yeah, and that differs from fascism.
Fascism is still a free market, but the government says you're now making tanks, and if you don't like it, you're shot. And if you make tanks, you're going to be rich. So you're going to want to make tanks for me. So that's the government directing the free market and not the other way around. And that actually makes the free market less efficient because the government's constantly interfering. I want you to make tanks, I want you to make whatever, and that's undermining the free exchange because the government's messing things up. And if you actually read some economic histories of World War II, Germany was on the way to collapse anyway because their economy was going to tank. They were constantly being, they had additional income because they were conquer other countries and steal all their stuff, but they really had a very poor economy. And of course, attacking the world, you get people don't like that and they resist, Okay, so the communist is called a command economy. So the government basically tells everyone what to do. You are now working in that factory, and the bread is now costing that much. That's it. And if you don't like it, what happens? Does anyone know?
You'll be punished.
You'll be punished, probably killed, and your family then will lose all their jobs, and they will never be able to be educated. Everyone you know that's associated with you will also be punished. Sound good? Okay, fascism, we talked about that. It's basically crony capitalism. It's basically collusion between the government and corporate interests. And then there's also things that are kind of, so the idea is, what's the role of democracy in relation to free markets? Do you need a democracy for a free market? Some people say yes, some people say no, but there are a lot of free market countries that have authoritarian or even communist control. So for example, Singapore is controlled by a dictator, but they are radically free market and they're extremely successful. So you don't need democracy that much. Does anyone know about China? What's their economy like? It started communist, and in the 70s they started to change. They started opening up more free market, more and more free market. There's still a lot of government interference with it, but fundamentally they've become a free market economy while remaining still communist politically. So there's one party, and if you don't like it, you get shot, but you can actually start your own business. Okay, we did this, we did that, and okay. So I just want to briefly talk about what this means. Just, you don't really have to know this for this course, but just if anyone's curious about what these terms mean, this is the basic argument that's going on today. There's people that believe in complete liberty, minimum government, and then there's people that believe in a lot of government. Very few people believe that there should be no free market. I mean, I'm sure there's some people out there, but even the Chinese communists said, okay, we give up its free markets. And no one's thinking about going back to communism. So this is not an argument about whether free markets work or not. It's like, how much balance should there be? So if you think about, okay, what is a Republican conservative? Over here, they're going to be more leaning towards the free markets. Some governments okay. Democrats are sort of in the middle. European socialists are far more government. Chinese authoritarian, they're very happy to interfere with the economy. So there's levels to it. Okay, so if you see some of these terms like libertarians, conservatives, Democrats and liberals, that's what they mean. You can actually understand a lot of this stuff simply on this one dimension of lots of free market, very little government, versus lots of government, very little free market. Or actually, free markets, but lots of government activity. Right? Make sense? All right. Sound good? Want to take off? Let's do that.
Oh yeah, no, they had a like solid 15-year run before they killed like millions of people, but they got rid of that.
But after that,
Like,
no.
let's be honest now, who hasn't accidentally killed 60 million people before?
Honestly,
Like, that's never believed it for me.
I'll vote for you.